It's Thursday, March 27th. I'm Adam Walsh, and this is The Signal. Today on the show, the spotlight on using art to talk about climate change. What kind of an impact can it have in this world of noise that surrounds us? We've got a full studio. The lines will be open. There's lots to talk about. Don't go anywhere. All right, off to the running. Here's where you come into it today. We will open the phone lines second half of the show. But as we're having this discussion, from movies to books, photography, performances, we're asking, is there a piece of art? Is there something, right, a painting, a movie, TV show that pushed you to think more about climate change? You can always text us right now, 709-327-8206, The Signal at cbc.ca. Joining me now in the studio, I'm going to go, let me see, left to right, Angela Antle. How you doing?
Hi, Adam.
Journalist, former CBC journalist, writing Energy Futures columns with The Independent now, author, and we could keep going, but there's lots of stuff. We got 55 minutes, so we'll dig into more of that after.
All right, fine.
Thanks for coming in.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Sarah Gieratz is here. How you doing?
Yes, thank you.
Interdisciplinary artist, Antarctic guide. Tell us where you're from.
Well, I'm born in Holland. I grew up in Belgium, but I live on the island of Svalbard, Spitsbergen, which is in the high Arctic, northernmost town in the world.
How'd you end up here?
Well, one day, about 2 years ago, I met Sarah on a residency, the Arctic Circle residency on a ship. She was there as an artist. I'm there as the on-site organizer, enabler, you could say. So that's where we met. And then now 2 years later, Sarah invited me through her project, Lean to come here.
Yeah, so Lean To, and you're talking about Sarah Joy Stoker is next to you. How you doing?
I'm good.
You too
Thank you.
are an interdisciplinary artist. Tell us about yourself. A little bit more than what I just said.
I've been a dance artist, a dancer, I guess, early days. I would have called myself a dancer, dancing for other people, right? Being hired as a interpret. And then I started making work. So always sort of rooted in dance, I would say, and performance, but very much, more interdisciplinary, interested in using video and images and objects and site-specific installation, durational actions.
Okay. Yeah. And Holly Hogan is here. How you doing?
I'm good. How are you doing?
Good. What's new with you? Because, you've been on the show a couple of times. Well, what's the latest?
Yeah. Well, it's really interesting, actually, and timely. I wrote an article for the New Quarterly that's coming out in April.
Yes.
And it discusses, the theme of the magazine is whose truth is it anyway? And I was tasked with writing about how art can help inform the understanding of science, which
nice.
So I got to dwell in that frame of mind for quite a while.
Cool.
Yeah, and here we are now. So it's really it's serendipitous.
This is perfect for this conversation today. And folks, of course, Holly Hogan, writer, wildlife biologist. If we're talking about art and either impacting the conversation, influencing the conversation, having something to do with the conversation of climate change, I'm just curious for each of you to go way back, and I'm going to do it too. Your first interaction with thoughts on climate change. So for me, I'm turning 45 in June. I remember growing up in '89, right? The Exxon Valdez spill in Alaska. Yep. I have memories of talking to my folks about that when it was on the news, right? Seeing the seabirds and covered in oil. And I was 9. I remember back then acid rain coverage, right? The 80s, such a big thing. I also remember watching like David Suzuki and the nature things all the time as a kid too, right? Like these were the impacts of me going through the 80s and either with its climate change or just people's impacts on damaging the earth. What about yourselves? What's an early memory?
I grew up in Grand Falls in the 70s. I'll just leave it there. Somewhere in the 70s. And my father, my uncles, my grandfather worked at the mill, pulp and paper mill. And the companies at that time that owned the mill sprayed for spruce budworm and some other moth insect to get rid of them.
Hemlock looper?
No, it was like a balsam woolly something.
Right.
And
Balsam woolly something.
yeah. They sprayed over the summers, and you could see the planes spraying from my house. And we spent a lot of time in the woods. We were berry pickers and hunters and fishers, and we burned wood to heat the house. So we were always in the woods. And I remember being aware that the poison was there and it falling into the water, and we were eating it. Like it just really, I became aware of it then. I was probably, in my 11, 12, 13. Yeah.
Wow, and such a time in life when you're like forming yourself, your future self in a way.
Probably when it's not a good time to be ingesting chemicals.
No, not a great. Never a great time, but especially that.
Yeah, and I did some research on it. There were 32 chemicals that they sprayed
32
over summers, right? Just all summer long.
Colonel's secret recipe there.
Yeah.
On that one. In the worst possible way. All right, Holly.
My earliest, and it was oil related because, I've been working on seabirds for a long time. And I had just left a seabird colony in Alaska when the Exxon Valdez oil spill happened. So I was significantly older than 9 at the time.
So you were 11.
Right. They hired young in those days. Yeah, and so I had been working on a seabird colony, actually on a species black-legged kittiwake that was failing, and this was part of the thing that I was doing, was looking at why these seabirds were failing. And so after, and our season ended early, actually, because all the chicks died. Yeah. So then I went off to Australia and saw on the news that there had been this horrendous spill. And I'd worked on oil spill cleanups in Newfoundland, cleaning oiled birds and accounting for oiled birds that were coming ashore. And John Pyatt, who is a seabird scientist, still is, but he was here at the time. And he was working on figuring out what the oiled birds represented as far as how many were actually dying out there in the open ocean. So, but I didn't get the connection between oil and climate change at that point, or between oil and plastic, because there was plastic beef buckets and stuff like that on the beaches. But it took a long time for it to all come home to roost.
Yeah, to connect, right? To go from 89 and to seeing that, and then through the 90s, the early 2000s, and as the conversation continued, you started to piece it all and look at it all together.
Yeah. Exactly. I'm still learning. I
hope
we all are.
Look, when the day comes when you say I'm done learning, I'm pretty sure that that's problematic.
Yes.
Right? Come on. The Sarahs, early on, climate change or some kind of an impact that really stood with you when you were young.
Yeah, I think, then I didn't realize that it was change or warming, but growing up where ice skating in the city was the most normal thing, and that changing during childhood. So also the mid-'80s to mid-'90s, that changing from being the most normal thing, that every winter it was safe and you just run out on whatever water there was around and ice skate, to that not being possible. Yeah. And I wasn't aware of it then as to the amount of change. But now I can see very clearly how that has changed. And I think the conscious awareness, like the really clear conscious awareness, is working in the polar regions, in this very remote areas where no one lives, and still finding all the traces.
Sarah?
I'm thinking of, I moved at some point, many times actually, over the last decade, and I found at one point in a box an essay that I wrote as a kid. Yeah. I don't recall right now. I have it somewhere safe. Who knows where that is? But I was little, I was a little kid, it was just 2 pages long, and it was in a little folder, and I drew some little pictures and stuff, and I got A+. And it was about deforestation. It was about clear-cutting forests. I don't know why I knew about that at that time, being that young, early 80s. But that's what I wrote about. And so I feel like it's always been I've always felt a bit worried, sort of all my memory of my life about the world and what's going on. And then, I guess when I started really forming proper, maybe cohesive thoughts around it and actionable things, I tell this story. The first piece of performance that I made that was shown in a professional environment that was programmed by a presenter and, had an audience was called They Cut Down Trees So You Can Wipe Your Ass and Blow Your Nose with the Softest Tissues Ever. And that was in 1999. Yeah. And that was like really, and I used footage that I purchased from CBC at the time before drones. Someone was in a helicopter or something, and it showed clear cutting like of the boreal forest above Quebec. I made a huge sculpture out in the front of the lobby of the theater. A friend helped me, like a 9-10 foot sculpture, and we covered it in toilet paper rolls.
Hilarious.
Right, and so I've always been, it's just for me, it's always been very alarming, and
But humor's important too, right, to get that message across. So you were using that in your work.
Absurdity almost, right?
Absurdity. It is absurd. It is absurd.
And he had a cape. He had a big cape, Superman cape on, and he was just a toilet paper roll man, giant one.
I'd call that humor.
Yeah.
I didn't, anyway, yeah.
Well, it just gets to the conversation then, which is why we're here today, right? To like talking about art and trying to get a message through or communicate with folks, because we're in this, especially nowadays, we're in this world of noise, fire hoses of information blasted in your face all the time. And disinformation, misinformation, you name it, right? Bots all over the place. So humor, but what are ways like that you folks think are, and especially when we think about art, about ways that can break through? Like, what is so special about art that can break through in these conversations and have an impact?
I think for me, and I think about this a lot, for me it's like the effect on the heart. It's the heart. So like in your book, Holly, when you talk about the diaper and you talk about the turtle, like your heart, we hear it, that your heart was broken. Sarah Garatz and I talk about, this has come up a lot in the month that she's been here, we talk about having a broken heart all the time, right? And so, yes, with all this, masses of information and stuff all the time, if something can stop someone a bit in their tracks and go like, oh my God, my heart, or like, that's like has a profound impact actually on me.
Yeah.
And what do you value then, right? And it helps you understand, actually skating in the winter was such a beautiful thing as a child. I value that and I've lost that. I think it helps break through to what you value.
And I also, because I've had conversations recently about climate change and people just conveniently saying, I don't believe in climate change, or I don't think we're capable of it. And so this is where science is incredibly important, because all the science points to climate change, and it's verifiable, and it's rigorous, and it's decades of science, and it's peer reviewed. Yeah. So these papers are not opinion pieces, and but it's dry and inaccessible, and there's lots of things about science that is limiting for the general public, and that's where art comes in. And so in my book, I was trying to bring the reader with me visually. I'm not a visual artist at all. But I could try to draw these images with words and make people care. And actually, the Jacques Cousteau quote at the front of the book is, people protect what they love. And so, again, it comes back to the heart. And this is Sarah's, Sarah Great. Her presentation, both of their presentations, a couple of weeks ago downtown, Sarah's art and her vulnerability in the landscape speaks to the heart and your vulnerability that you were presenting, and how it made us all feel very vulnerable. It's so powerful. I think art is going to save us if anything is.
And that book, by the way, Message in a Bottle, Ocean Dispatches from a Seabird Biologist, available wherever books are sold. And it's a great read. So
Thank you,
do
Anne.
look around for that if you're looking for something to read. You're going to say?
Yeah, in some of my research around the sustainable transition or the lack of action around sustainable transition in Newfoundland and Labrador, there's a gap between knowledge and action. And we all know, I mean, surely we're beyond, is this real?
Well, yeah,
I
you'd be
know there are
surprised.
people,
Yeah.
but we know this is happening. We see the evidence, but there is a huge chasm between knowing about climate change and what do I do?
Yep.
And I think art can help bridge that chasm. It's not a straight line. I think it's multi-tentacled, but art can teach you to, like, what is it I care about? What do I want to preserve? How can I act to change this?
Go ahead, Sarah.
Yeah, I think for art to communicate climate change, it's not about like more we know the facts, we know everything. We should know, but it's very clear. And for art, it's not to communicate these numbers again or this knowledge. But for me, so I live up there in the fastest warming place on Earth. And it is very much about communicating the realness of that place, not as a sublime, distant, high Arctic, which we have to go see before it's gone, but to communicate, to be there and to communicate it as a place which is just as real as here, and almost as a place which is a prediction for what is going to happen, because it's all happening faster there, but it just predicts what is coming here.
As opposed to folks treating it like it's another planet, another world. You're like, no. This is this world, our world. And a lot of times I find when people talk about the North, it gets referred to as like the front lines of climate change because it's happening first. You've been doing a lot over the years, right? You've been bringing folks in. Can you tell us about that and their reaction and what you think that might do for the visiting artists?
Yeah, so over the past about 15 years, there has been a artist residency called the Arctic Circle, and it has brought many artists to the high Arctic. And I think, my role is being there, enabling all the different projects. But I think a big part of the role is also because everyone comes with their preconceptions of the Arctic and of the work they want to make. And to make sure that there is time and space to make a step back and actually look around, like actually be there and realize what is going on, what you're seeing, how you can read, because on Spitsbergen, you can read the climate change very clearly in the landscape. You can look at the mountains and you see where the glaciers have been, how they have been retreating. There are very clear visual signs of the changes over the last years, decades, that are visible there. And yeah, I'm very privileged, I think, to work for such a long time with so many artists in the same area where there is so much change. But I see very clearly how the awareness, but also how the action is changing from the Arctic being more like a background for projects or imaginations or work to a very real environment where the feeling and experiencing has taken more place than the actual creating of something which has the Arctic as a background. So I can see that change very clearly.
Can you do me a favor? For folks listening, can you just describe this place for us?
The island?
Yeah.
Yes. It's a large island, far north, at 78 degrees north, which means that the sun sets the 25th of October and it will not rise until the 15th of February. And then in less than 2 months, we are back at the midnight sun. So when I come home next week, when I left, I hadn't seen the sun yet. The first sun I saw this year was here. And when I come back, it will be midnight sun already. So even throughout the year, the changes in light and time, they are very strong. You never forget about time. That's why I live there. That's why I keep living there. About 60% of the island is covered by glaciers, by ice. In winter, by snow, it's completely white. And winter lasts until late May. So we have 2 weeks of spring in June and then 2 weeks of summer. And then the fall
Sounds
is
like
back.
Newfoundland, actually.
Yeah?
Just kidding. No, we're not that dramatic.
Yeah, a little bit more condensed even, I think, because we have these 4 months of darkness. And then the rest of the year happens in the 8 other months. So there's no roads. Well, there's a road to the airport and a road to the mine. The town has always been based on coal mining,
Yeah.
which is now really nearing its end. There's only one small mine left, but that one is about to close as well. So only a few roads. I've really enjoyed the endless driving here. In summer, we drive snowmobiles. But that's our freedom, driving over the snow, over the glaciers. In winter, it's walking and boats and water. Mountains, no trees. We do have flowers. All the birds leave in winter, so it's very silent. But they will be back when I come back as well. Whales will be coming back. There's polar bears. There's reindeer. Small. Short-legged. Svalbard reindeer. And there's polar foxes. So it's a wild place. It's also a place where it's not that easy to be present. So as soon as you leave town, you always bring a rifle.
Yeah.
Which is practical, but it also has a lot to do with experience and confidence. So I think for me, the importance in making art there, it has a lot to do with knowing this place and knowing it deep, being confident. Most of the work I make, you cannot make if you just arrive there. I could not have made it. It needs a lot of time getting to know the place and, being able to be alone in such a silent and overwhelming and changing and potentially dangerous environment.
Quite the backdrop for art and thinking and thought. So, Sarah, when you, for your folks' involvement, what did it do for you?
It was, it's stunningly beautiful there. It's often completely silent, which is
Interesting.
nice. When I did it, I know it's changing now, Sarah has said, but we all put our phones, there was no need to have a phone or a laptop because there's no signal. So it was 2 weeks of no messages, no emails, no nothing.
Sounds nice.
Yeah, just that, right?
It's a luxury.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
In town, we do have, we are connected very much, but out on the ship, we until now are still able to sail out of connection.
Yeah, so it's just stunningly beautiful. It really forces, a lot of introspection and, for me, I'm going to cry on radio. Sadness and grief around what's going on. Gratitude. But then fear, right? And grief, a lot of grief. And I went up, we've talked about this numerous times over the month in different talks. I went up with a very specific project in mind that I wanted to do. And that was, that's a bit connected to how we make projects like this happen. So funding. I applied for close to 5 years for funding to be able to go on that trip. And I just wasn't successful for all that time. And when I finally wrote an application, and the first time I attached it to a performance, quote unquote, a product, a production, I got the money.
That you imagined in advance.
I had to,
Yes.
imagine this thing that I like. Really, it's ridiculous. And again, we talked about that.
Imagine a thing, the place you haven't been to, that thing you're going to do, but you haven't been there, you don't know. But and the whole point is to go there to be impacted by it and to be influenced. Okay. Cool.
Yeah. We talked about that at Grenfell with Jane. That it's backwards, really, how our art funding works as far as producing, asking for money to produce a thing that you don't know yet what it is. And anyway, that's another show.
We could do a whole other show on that. I'll put it ahead on the calendar.
But because I did have to connect this then I had to create something at the end. I went up with a very specific idea. Will Gill, our beloved Will Gill, had been on this residence almost 10 years before. So I did, and he's a friend. I talked to Will quite a bit before. So I did my best to really be as prepared as I could and have a sense of what could be possible. And so I brought things with me. I brought plastics with me and some objects, some things to wear. And the idea was to get video and photographs of myself in this quote-unquote pristine, untouched environment. And my, intellectual brain sort of in going with that idea was that for me, bringing these objects, plastics, and then also just bright colored things was to show a bit the absurdity of me in that space. Like, I don't think I should be there. And then certainly none of these objects should have been there, right? So that was really my intention. So being there, I was a bit conflicted, actually. Yeah. I feel very privileged to be here. It was fairly low impact how that residence works as far as the ship. It's a sailing ship. It does engine a lot. We have to, but it's at least trying to be small impact. But yeah, it's still, I felt quite conflicted. I think no one should be in these places, really, at this point.
I think that's really healthy, though, for a conversation, because nothing is one way or another. There's so many things to think about and talk about if you're doing art in the far north and what you're doing there. Like, it's a great thing to acknowledge all of it and have a conversation like we're doing, right now. What do you think?
I would just love to touch on, like Sarah was getting emotional there. And I think it's so important, and that's another really important role of art, because, we hear these statistics and trends, and, I read in the New York Times the day before yesterday the 10 hottest years on record for the last 10 years. Yeah. And it makes you feel depressed and anxious and hopeless. But the thing about art, nobody does anything from a place of hopelessness, right? But art is so inspiring. And I mean, who hasn't been moved emotionally by a beautiful piece of music or, and of course the art that you guys produce that we've been talking about. And I think it's really important to feel the grief, to feel the rage, to feel the hopelessness, and to take all of that energy and turn it and use it for action.
Yeah, it's an act of resistance, right?
It is, absolutely. And I think it's great that you're grieving. I mean, I bet you everybody at this table is grieving, what's happening to our planet. And that's what we're all trying to do, is to shed light in whatever ways are available to us.
There is a word for environmental grief, solastalgia.
There you go.
Yeah. That grief that you feel about the loss of being able to skate in the winter, or, being able to do certain things in nature. Yeah.
And for townies around the table of a certain age, do you remember every March, the St. John's, the coast around St. John's was packed with pack ice.
Yeah.
And sometimes the harbor was full of pack ice. Yeah. There hasn't been pack ice around St. John's. I remember seeing somebody hunting seals in Torbay on the pack ice. And I remember my diving instructor saying he was shot at because he resembled a seal. Diving around the pack ice.
Every spring, I was growing up in CBS. Every spring, you'd get young folks around my age, not me, out doing silly things on the ice. And you're like, don't do that. That's too far. That's really reckless. But anyways, it's just changes. Especially this year.
It was part of our culture.
Warmest January on record, right? So we were talking about what happened to winter. We get a bit of winter in February, and now all of a sudden, it might even be spring. Like it probably won't be in April, but still, like there's definite changes that you'll notice in it from weather to climate. Sarah?
Yeah, so we just got back from the West Coast, and I got home, and in my little garden, like all my bulbs are up.
Yeah.
They're not like up like this, they're like up like that. And there was an article yesterday or the day before about how 5 or 6 of the U.S. northern states have all now officially had their leaves have sprung.
And although
that's early.
Although that could be seen as positive by some people, this is a sign. I mean, scientists have said this is a sign of, the changes are happening. It is going to get more extreme. We're not always going to have this mild winter and mild, no shoveling, and mild spring, early spring. It's actually going to get worse.
Folks, you're listening to The Signal. If you want to call in or talk to us or email us or text us, we're talking about climate change, but the influence art can have on it, kind of piercing through all the noise that is out there. And thinking about art, my question for you, movies, books, paintings, photography, performances, podcasts. Is there something a piece of art that's pushed you to think more about climate change. 709-722-7111, 1-800-563-8255. You can text us 709-327-8206, the signal at cbc.ca. Here with me in studio, we've got Sarah Giratz. Am I getting better around that?
Yes,
Trying,
yes.
yeah, because
Giratz.
Giratz, Arctic Antarctic guide and interdisciplinary artist. Sarah Joy Stoker, dancer, interdisciplinary performance artist. Holly Hogan, writer, wildlife biologist. Angela Antle, journalist, author. MUN PhD candidate. I'll throw that in too.
Yeah.
And you're leaving soon. Tell folks where you're going.
I'm going to the
You're
Rachel...
coming back, though.
I
but,
am,
you know,
yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I'm not leaving because of the mild winter. I'm going to the Rachel Carson Center at the University of Munich on Saturday I'm going to the Orkneys first to do some research at Orkney Islands off Scotland, and then I'm going down to Munich for 4 months to write a climate fiction podcast. That's why I interjected
Oh, no,
podcast.
I got that. Yeah. Tell us a bit more about the thoughts around. Again, I'm not the government with funding here. You don't need to tell me the whole thing because you haven't done it yet. But tell us like the early broad strokes for your thoughts on this.
This is part of my PhD. I did an interview-based podcast, which is available now. Holly Hogan is on one of the episodes, called Gyre, which mixes together the thoughts of artists and scientists around different issues in the North Atlantic. So it's very on theme with today. So you can find that on Apple Podcasts. And I'm also doing a fictional podcast. So, a story, a speculative future called Hag Island about Newfoundland and Labrador. And I use the hag reference as a kind of metaphor for the slow violence of climate change, because it is a slow violence.
This comes to I had a work discussion yesterday around climate change, because I get emails sometimes whenever we do a show on climate change. I'll say climate change, global warming, but I will also get emails saying, well, why not climate crisis? Why not climate emergency? And
all those things apply. Climate weirdness is another one.
And they're all there. But the slowness and the point that was brought up to me yesterday, for crises and emergencies, typically like a crisis is a shorter period of time. An emergency is like a now thing, but tomorrow it may not be. But when you have this long stretched out,
and that's why people don't know what to do.
And it can be hard to wrap your head around, so we're always in an emergency. We're always in a crisis. And it's like, well, yes, to a certain extent. And also, depending on what you look at for the conversation, perhaps no to also a certain extent. But it doesn't mean things aren't changing.
Well, it's a good point, because people think, well, we're getting away with it so far. Nothing, we're getting away with it so far. But then there's tipping points, at which point, like, getting into ocean currents when the
AMOC stops working.
stops, which is this really complicated circulation of cold and warm ocean currents, and the Labrador current is part of that. And as the Gulf Stream and it comes closer to temperature to the Arctic Ocean, the dynamics that create that affect a physical oceanographer. It told me that the deep strands of the Labrador Current affect ocean temperatures off Australia. Yeah. So the interconnectedness of the planet. And so when the water stops circulating, it stops circulating nutrients, it stops circulating oxygen. Mm-hmm. Over half the air we breathe is from the ocean. And we don't know when that tipping point is, But what we do know is that we're getting perilously close. And people just see that as the boy crying wolf, right? Because that's all people hear is, oh, we're getting so close, we're getting so close. But when we get there, it's going to be too late.
Yeah, there's no reversal.
Yeah.
We got a note into the show from Tyler Mugford. Hi, Adam. Great discussion today. Thanks, Tyler. Being from and growing up in Labrador and being closely tied to the land, climate change has always been forefront in my mind. I echo the grief and emotion that has been shared throughout the show, as I have seen a big difference in the ice, snow, and freeze-ups in my short 20-odd years of life. Indigenous people are being forced to adapt as we are losing traditional roots. If anyone doubts climate change or thinks it is not an issue, look to the north. Combining art and climate change is so interesting. Grateful that we are having these conversations. Tyler, thanks for listening, and thank you so much for that.
Thank you, Tyler.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, and we have to think about the ways of knowing, that are tied to the land for Indigenous people, and the loss of culture that's going to come with climate change, right?
Yeah, I was just up in Nain back in the winter, and it was just as the sea ice was coming in late. So did some interviews there. They'll be coming on a show in a couple of weeks, actually.
Great.
Yeah, it's a smart ice, chatting with folks in Nain and talking just about the obvious the importance of those sea highways, the ice highways in the winter, and when this ice
hunters.
doesn't freeze,
Yeah.
what that means. So more conversations in the future here on The Signal. Sarah, for all the artists you've worked with over the years,
Sarah G.
Sarah G,
Yes.
not Sarah Stoker. But I mean, it can go to you too after. But
Yeah.
for everyone who's visited that you've worked with, is there what's the range of reactions when folks when they visit you in the north and they see everything and they start to think about their art project? Is there like a typical reaction? Is it kind of like all over the place?
Well, it's so many artists
Yeah.
with so many different backgrounds, but also so many different ways of communicating. It's dance, it's theater, circus, writing, music, sound, anything you can imagine, and a bit more. So the range has been everything. But what I see, so I have a very special position in which I never see the final product, if there is a product, so to say. I see the outcome, that's a better word. So I see the process. I see the part which you never see from an artist. I see the part which usually would be in the studio or in a rehearsal or the idea. And that is what we all share on the ship. So I see, a lot of emotion and a lot of raw reactions, a lot of confusion, a lot of, where the imagination and the reality don't overlap, but also the realization of, it's here. There are these changes. So yes, I see a lot of raw emotion, and so it's a very intense. Also working, it's very intense work. It's little sleep, but it does bring you to this rawness where at the end of an expedition, after a few weeks at sea, I often feel like I don't have skin anymore. And it's a difficult, that's not easy, but it's also a very beautiful and open place where you can receive a lot. And I think that has to do a lot with grief again. So to go back to the grief, it's not only the grief, it's both at the same time. And that is where the art is, because we cannot only communicate this grief, we communicate it together with the beauty, with the presence, with the overwhelming reality of the Arctic. So it's the both of them that come together, and that's the struggle to exist within both. For example, we can be anchored in front of a glacier. A glacier is always overwhelming. It's blue and present and big, and everyone is hoping to see a calving, like to see a big piece of glacier ice falling off. And if you spend time with a glacier, you will see that at one point. But then that moment of like, it could be an enormous part and it will fall down in the ocean, and you have this wave, all the birds are coming for the upwell of the nutrients there. So the ice is falling, the wave is coming towards the ship, and you see all the ice moving. It's beautiful and it's painful. And to be in that at the same time, I think that is what we have to do. Like to be open and raw, to receive it, and to be aware of all the changes, and to be aware that it's both at the same time, the loss and the and the love. I always compare it with love, with like falling in love again, even though the last time your heart was broken, you all said, "I'll never fall in love again." I said it a few times, and then I do it again, open, fearless.
Have you ever been somewhere away from home that's given you some like a reaction or a moment from nature or a setting that others get when they meet you at home? Because for me, like I've been north of 60 once. I sailed up with the Navy in my early 20s. And I remember so we're way off the coast of Labrador, right, heading up towards Baffin Island. And the memory is still there of just the sheer amount of icebergs and ice, and it was nothing like. And then even back then, my little tiny early 20-something brain of Adam Walsh back then, it was like Gosh, that's a lot of ice coming down from the from the north. It has, I mean, what does that mean for what's left up there? And I mean, that was then I didn't think about it again for a while, but now I still think about it. Like, it was a moment for me, right? When I saw the moving moment of like Mount Fuji being there and thinking about the power underneath. Like, they're moments that we have in life. Have you had anything else away from home that struck you?
I'm not quite. If I have those moments,
but like
even
not home, like whether it's here in Newfoundland or somewhere else in Canada or America or anywhere else on the planet, has there been any other non-North nature thing that you've?
Non-North.
Yeah.
Well,
non-North. Yeah.
non-North.
Is she allowed to go to the South Pole?
Yes, of course.
I had it.
Yeah.
I have to say that I'm not much not north or not polar, and that's So before I accidentally ended up living on Spitsbergen,
Which is a hilarious story. But anyway, go on.
it is. Before that, I was moving a lot. I was traveling, always on the way, always kind of looking for a place to grow roots, I think, but also always feeling I should see other places. Then when I came to the north, I realized now I don't want to know a lot. I want to know deep.
Yeah.
I want to spend time in one place. I want to know more. I want to understand. I want to see. I want to witness. Not only now, but over time. So I would say since I moved to Spitsbergen in 2012, I haven't been many other places than north. I've been south, which is the total opposite, but it's the same.
So what was that like arriving there? Total opposite, but the same.
Well, so I worked 8 years on a tall ship in Antarctica.
Yeah.
And I always had to change airports in Buenos Aires. This was the total wilderness for me. That bus ride, really hot, and I would have my Arctic gear. Of course, it couldn't all fit, so I was wearing my big boots and my sailing gear. So that would be the not north, but there was not much more experience in there than going on. Then arriving to Ushuaia, I would be home completely.
Patagonia.
Yes, Patagonia. It's home. So both ends of the world, they are home. Just as I've felt very much at home here. And I don't know if you would count this as north or if you consider this more south. But I think it's similar in the way that it's at the edge.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that has been a very important part for me, like moving away from cities, moving away from, especially in art, what we consider as the center. I always thought it was really important to be. I mean, I lived in Brussels, in Amsterdam, in Reykjavik, in Helsinki. I wanted to be in the center. But I didn't, before moving to the edge, I didn't know yet that the edge can very well be the center, especially now when the changes are so strong. And they're not so strong and so visible in the center of a city. Mm-hmm. They're visible on the edge. Here, I don't know, I wish I could be here much longer. But here, like at the edge, I can imagine what you told as well, like you see how much ice is coming in or not coming in. And it's the same up there. Like, you're so much in the center of the changes that it doesn't matter that we're not in the center of communication. Especially now communication is so wide and open that we can communicate in other ways than living in the center of what we would think is important.
Anyone? Angela?
Oh.
I thought you were going to say that. You're like,
no, I was just like deeply in thought and agreeing. Being on the edge is, I chose to come back to the edge because, I was in Toronto as an artist, went to art school, and it wasn't my jam, it wasn't what I wanted to make art about. It wasn't where I wanted to live. I wanted to be closer to nature and on the edge. Yeah.
But Angela, for you, you've had this great journalism career, and now, you leave here, and I'm seeing all of this. There's art, there are think pieces, all climate. Like, was that all? Like, where was the catalyst? Was that, or was it just the slow creep of everything, just as what climate change is doing?
The slow creep, the hag. I always did. I always had a parallel art practice while I was
Yeah.
working as a journalist here at CBC, and did pieces that critiqued, like a couple of neon pieces that critiqued the boom bust economy of Newfoundland and Labrador.
Yeah,
The
yeah.
Have Not neon piece, the Burn Your Boats neon piece, and other pieces, installations and things that have critiqued the political economy, I guess, of Newfoundland and Labrador. Not specifically about climate change, but as I was doing more Atlantic Voice documentaries, I was really getting concerned. And although Atlantic Voice is such a lovely gig and you get to do a deep dive, I wanted to go deeper.
Right.
So when I left, I went the deepest you can go. I did a PhD, interdisciplinary PhD. And it's been a huge learning curve. It's been a huge learning curve to go back to school. Like, I was there when there was a card catalog. I think I was there at the beginning of the digital library, but anyway, there's been a lot of learning, and it's been fantastic. I have loved every minute of it. I love being a student. Yeah,
Cool.
I'm not sure if that's what you were asking me about.
I think I just looked. There was like thoughts, and then I could see you were deep in it. So I figured, let me pull some of those out here. Sarah Joy Stoker, what about yourself?
As far as another place,
Yeah.
that same question,
Yeah,
I would
or-
say it's Svalbard. It's where
Yeah.
that would have had the biggest impact on me. And as far as impact, aside from what I already said, it was a big triggering moment actually for me when I came home from that trip. It's when I decided. I felt that it was like this was the moment to activate Lean To. So Lean To is an idea that I've had for a decade thereabouts. I bought lean2.ca like 8 years ago, like literally. So that's how long I've known, that is going to happen at some point. I just have to, life is complicated and there's a lot going on. Anyway, that trip, being up there, I guess, my experience and the work I made there, meeting Sarah was a huge part of it, and the other guides and the other artists, the other people. So everything about that, and coming home and thinking about, okay, well, now how am I going to show this work, and what is all that about? So that show I was going to do or needing to do for the funders, and it just really got my mind, I guess, in the readied state, and I did it. So Lean To. I'm really excited. I think it's really important, and potentially is going to be really exciting and active, I hope. So it's an initiative to basically try to support, and sometimes through presentation and sometimes through funding, support artists and work that is speaking directly, actively to social and ecological justice. To be honest, it's it's almost like a selfish act, because I'm often really disappointed and bored, to be honest, with the work I see. Yeah. Like, I don't see what I want to be seeing as far as, what's being made, I think, in the world. And it's always been what I've made. I've always worked this way, as far as that's always been the themes generally. So that's it. And also trying to promote less product-oriented things, less, so more durational work, residences, research-based, long installations, for example, and also trying to put work really actively in front of public as easily and accessibly as possible. So free, in public spaces, large pieces. Don't get me wrong, I love festivals and I love galleries and I love theaters. But I also think there's a lot of opportunity to produce more or have more work out of those spaces and in front of public more often. So in surprising places, in places that are going to have impacts. And getting work that people otherwise are not going to see, right? Like just putting it in front of them. So that's what Lean To is about. So having Sarah here for this month-long residence, that was one of the first events of Lean To, and I'm actively writing funding apps now for next year.
Cool.
Lean2.ca.
Lean2.ca.
Beautiful website.
We've got Warwick Chubbs is on the line, calling from St. Louis, Labrador.
Oh.
Hey, how you doing?
Hi, how are you doing there?
Good, bye. Good. What are you at?
And not too much right now. I just eat my dinner there. I had the show on there, so I thought I'd give you a dingle.
Thank you. Any thoughts from what you're hearing?
We had a little bit more frost a year than we had last year.
Yeah.
And we got a little bit more snow. Not very much.
Yeah.
Very little. But
Well,
I
go
see a
ahead.
big difference in our weather pattern in this last 35, 40, 50 years. Big changes.
So then bring me back 35, 40 years ago. What was it like then compared to now?
Well, the ice we used to get years ago was all Fahrenheit. You know, our temperature was done by Fahrenheit.
Yeah.
But now it's all metric. And Celsius and all this old stuff, right?
Yeah.
It seems like now we don't get the same amount of ice with these temperatures we get. So we get to minus, say 20 or 21 or 22 or something like that. 23, 24, maybe every now and then. We don't get the ice like we used to get years ago when on the old Fahrenheit would be probably 18, 20, and 25 like that. And not only here, it's all along the coast, because I hear reports from northern communities like up in Nain, Rigolet, and Hopedale, and them places, and they got the same problem up here as we got.
Yeah.
There's no ice. It don't last in the spring of the year because there's nothing there to last.
And boy, how does that affect your fishing and hunting?
Well, it don't make a big lot of difference to us when it comes to hunting and fishing, because we hunt from the land mostly here. We do some seal hunting and bird hunting in boat, but you can get out almost any time you want to go now in boat and go hunting if you want to go. But it's completely different than what it was years ago.
All right, Warwick, we only have 3 minutes left of the show, so I got to cut you off early. But thanks, as always, for listening and calling in and just talking about what's on the go in Labrador and for St. Louis. Thanks so much.
Okay. Take care and have a nice evening.
All right,
Thank
you
you.
too. Cheers now.
Yeah.
Warwick Chubb's there, calling from St. Louis, Labrador. Final thoughts, folks, as we wrap down today?
Can I suggest a podcast for people to
Yes,
listen
go
to?
for it. Yeah.
There's a great BBC podcast called Forest 404, and it's a speculative, fictional podcast about a future time. And the actors are fantastic. They're from Doctor Who. You might recognize some of the voices. And it is great. And it's also great for teachers because it has a full suite on the website of associated environmental, educational stuff with it.
And if I can, something else that's been on my mind a lot, so a big part of Lean To and just my work and sharing work of other people that doing similar things is to try to promote like action, like reactions in public, right? And then hopefully like considerations of how we're going to vote and what do you think of that policy and who are you going to buy from? Are you going to boycott? And what I think is so interesting currently is with the Trump and the states and all the things, like people have mobilized, right?
There's movement.
Mobilized against the tariffs and American products. Like people are like around here. I mean, you see it. Like everyone's like, nope, that's it. I'm not buying anything from the States, which is great. Imagine if people could mobilize around climate, right? Which we don't. And I think it's because it's such an existential threat. It's such a long thing. Our nervous systems kind of can't, we're frozen in not knowing how to activate, but, boycotting and choosing what you purchase. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that this has to do with public. It's not public. It's governments and it's massive corporations.
Yeah.
I mean, look at the amount of, bombing on Palestine right now. Like the climate impact of that is like, it's just staggering. But at the same time, I think if we did mobilize like in large numbers, politicians, they will listen. They do listen at a certain moment, right?
Especially
when they come to your door for the election.
Well, we got three elections this year, right? Federal one happening now, provincial one going to happen at some point, and municipal one, I believe it's October 3rd. We only 30 seconds. Any final thoughts? You're leaving Monday.
Leaving Monday. Well, final thoughts on all of this. I think that with all the information, like it all doesn't make sense anymore. It's not about making sense. It's about action. It's not about, there's more ice next year. It's about unpredictability. So trying to leave the making sense and go to action and to prepare for everything being unpredictable.
And can I say, moving away from oil and gas, that's one of the biggest thing.
Absolutely.
The only thing if we don't get away from that, we're not going to solve the problem.
Yep.
Thank you very much. Thank you for this discussion, folks. Much appreciated. That's it for the show today, everyone. Thank you for listening. The Signal at cbc.ca for your thoughts. Tomorrow, look, it's Friday. We're going to have a little listening party. This year's RPM Challenge. The challenge, it's a global creative challenge to record original music in February. That's all recorded, and we're going to listen to some of it tomorrow and talk about it. That's tomorrow's show. Until then, thanks for listening.